What's up everybody, welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony, let's jump in. Okay, first up, at the start of the week, the Biden administration announced that US officials will boycott the 2022 Beijing Olympics, expressing that it would not send any American government officials to the event. American athletes will still be able to compete in the games, however. White House Press Secretary Paskey expressed in the announcement, quote, "This is just an indication that it cannot be business as usual. That does not mean that it is the end of the concerns we will raise about human rights issues," end quote. Several European nations and other nations may be considering similar steps. For example, a representative of the French government expressed yesterday, quote, "We take note of the decision of the Americans. When we have concerns on human rights, we say so to the Chinese. We took sanctions on Xinjiang in March. We will coordinate at the European level," end quote. Unsurprisingly, Beijing is not happy about the announcement of the US boycott. So far, however, it has only employed words and no real actions to hit back at the United States. This may change later in the week, though. This is what Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian expressed at a press conference on Tuesday in response to a question about the US boycott. Quote, "The US has been fabricating the biggest lie of the century about so-called genocide in Xinjiang, but it has long been debunked by facts. Based on its ideological biases, as well as lies and rumors, the United States attempts to interfere with the Beijing Winter Olympics, which will only expose its malicious intentions and make it lose more moral principles and credibility," end quote. Now, with this fiery statement from the People's Republic of China Foreign Ministry, this brings us nicely to our next development. For anyone who has been curious as to why the People's Republic of China has adopted its more adversarial and frankly at times aggressive style of diplomacy in recent years, a style that is shown to be counterproductive at times, we have a very important document here to look at. Yesterday, the Party Committee of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs published an important piece on core diplomacy ideology in the state-run People's Daily called "Opening Up New Prospects for China's Diplomacy in the New Era with Xi Jinping Thought on Diplomacy as a Guide." It is important that we study this document because it gives us a clear signal about Beijing's sentiment towards diplomatic work going forward, and as such tells us how PRC diplomats around the world are going to be directed and act in the future. A new generation of diplomats will also be rising through the ranks exposed to this thinking. We will see in this document that China uses the term developing countries a lot, suggesting that China wishes to present a worldview where developing countries and nations are one camp and that China is a member of that camp. It will likely argue that as a so-called development success story, China is a legitimate leader of that camp, and this is the sort of rhetoric we may see in its diplomatic efforts in emerging markets. Here is some of the document. Quotes, "Major changes have taken place in the international balance of power. This is reflected in the collective rise of a large number of emerging markets and developing countries. Over the past 20 years, emerging markets and developing countries have contributed 80% to world economic growth, and their share of global GDP has increased from 24% to over 40% over the past 40 years. The next point that the paper argues is that this century will be an Asian century, and China, again, is an Asian country and thus an Asian leader. Quote, "Second, the global power structure is undergoing profound changes. Last year, Asia's GDP accounted for about 38% of the world's total, with 227 of the world's top 500 companies. 5 of the top 10 cities in the Global Sustainable Competitive Ranking by the United Nations Habitat Program are from Asia. Many studies believe that the world's economic center is accelerating from the United States and Europe to Asia, causing a profound pattern of evolution," end quote. The document's third point, or the third argument, is one that we've heard a lot over the last year. We've been covering it here, coming from Beijing and from state media and from Chinese think tanks. This idea that the West is experiencing systemic and institutional collapse, with the document indirectly suggesting the superiority of the PRC system. Quote, third, the ebb and flow of soft power between the East and the West. A few major Western countries are beset with internal conflicts, including vicious political rivalries, social rifts, acute disparities between rich and the poor, institutional failures, broken government promises, and people's disappointment. The so-called liberal democracy has lost its luster, and attempts to export democracy overseas will not work. Many scholars and media believe that more and more countries are getting rid of the superstition of neoliberalism and are devoted to exploring modernization paths suited to their national conditions. End quote. For those wondering whether the so-called wolf warrior style of diplomacy will continue, this was included in the document as well. Quote, diplomats must have the courage to struggle, break new ground, and pursue all-round major country diplomacy with Chinese characteristics. Cast aside illusions, have the courage to struggle, never budge on principles, never give up an inch of land, fight to the end with all strength those who attempt to slow the great rejuvenation of the Chinese race, and safeguard national sovereignty, security, and development interests. End quote. China's now months-long Delta outbreak has still not been stamped out. Though the situation has not blown up, there are still over 100 official new cases being reported over several regions of the country every day. Due to the super strict zero cases policy pursued by the government, even the discovery of just one case can cause expensive disruptions for a city or a town. As we've discussed in previous videos, however, this policy is here to stay. On Tuesday, in an interview with the Beijing-based state-run China News Weekly, the director of the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention said that China will stick to its, quote, dynamic zero-tolerance COVID-19 policy over the winter and spring, end quote, expressing that vaccines continued to prevent serious disease, hospitalization, and death, but there were uncertainties over the effectiveness of vaccines against new variants. Quote, our vaccines still work, but their efficacy is greatly compromised. It is hard to tell to what extent. End quote. Okay, now to Evergrande, the big news, Evergrande and the Chinese housing crisis. Yesterday, I brought you guys the breaking development that Evergrande may have formally defaulted on an overseas bond payment. Though the default still cannot be officially confirmed, there are now several strong sources that claim that some creditors have not received the funds due to them on Tuesday evening, Hong Kong time. An announcement should be made in the coming days confirming whether the payment has been made or not. If Evergrande has formally defaulted, this would trigger a cross default on the firm's roughly $19 billion of international bonds. Now, a lot has happened with Evergrande and the Chinese housing crisis over the last few days, so it's worth taking a step back and walking through each of these developments. By the way, guys, if you're enjoying the content, please hit that like button. It is the only way a small channel like this will be recommended to other people. It's the only way a small channel can grow. So if you hit that like button, it's a huge help. If you're watching this for the first time and you're enjoying the content, getting some value from it, maybe consider subscribing. You'll have the most up-to-date analysis when it comes out every day. Oh, and if you'd rather listen to the episode, China Update is available on most podcast platforms. Just search China Update. Last Friday, China Evergrande told investors through a filing with the Hong Kong Stock Exchange that, quote, in light of the current liquidity status, there is no guarantee that the group will have the sufficient funds to continue to perform its legal obligations, end quote. Soon after the statement, a spokesperson for the local government of Guangdong expressed that they were, quote, highly concerned about China Evergrande's announcement, end quote, and in response summoned Evergrande's chairman for an emergency meeting. During the meeting, it announced that a government working group would take control of Evergrande to, quote, oversee risk management, strengthen internal controls, and maintain normal operations, end quote. Late that evening, regulators in Beijing, including the People's Bank of China, China's central bank, and the China Banking and Insurance Regulatory Commission issued coordinated statements to calm spooked markets and assure investors that the situation was under control. On Monday night, Monday just been, in a statement, Evergrande said that it would form a new risk management committee that would, quote, play an important role in mitigating and eliminating the future risks of the group, end quote. The committee includes representatives from state-owned enterprises controlled by the central and local governments. On Tuesday, yesterday, it was confirmed by Chinese financial media that, according to sources, the Guangdong government has formally assumed responsibility for Evergrande. The working group will take over Evergrande and find third parties, likely state-owned developers, to take over its development projects. In one interview, Chen Long, a consultant at a Beijing-based consultancy firm called Plenum, expressed, quote, after that, Evergrande is done. Original shareholders, including the founder, will be wiped out. One of the other big developers that is in a lot of trouble is Kaisa Group, a company whose pain we've been following for some time now. Indeed, Kaisa is China's largest holder of offshore debt among developers after Evergrande. In a filing over the weekend, China Shandong High-Speed Financial Group disclosed that Kaisa Group has sold it the 38th floor of the center, one of Hong Kong's tallest skyscrapers, for approximately $96.2 million. The Chinese developer has also put 18 Shenzhen property projects estimated at $12.8 billion up for auction. Late on Monday evening, New Money Consortium, which owns more than 50% of the outstanding bond debt due on Tuesday night, sent Kaisa draft terms of forbearance. There is still no confirmed result regarding this offer. Then on Wednesday, trading in shares of Kaisa Group holdings was suspended, according to the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Hong Kong financial media is reporting that the suspension was implemented because Kaisa was believed to be unlikely to meet its $400 million offshore debt deadline on Tuesday. Non-payment by Kaisa would push the bond of Kaisa into technical default, triggering cross defaults on its offshore bonds totaling nearly $12 billion. On Wednesday, while trading in shares of Kaisa Group holdings was suspended, trading in Kaisa Capital Investment Holdings was not suspended. This morning, its price plunged 17%. Hey guys, I'd love to hear what you thought about some of the updates we covered in today's episode, so throw your comments below. Always love hearing from you. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.